Hi, my name is Keri James and welcome to my presentation on selection bias. So first of all, let's talk about what bias is and more specifically, what is selection bias? Bias in research occurs when we either consciously or unconsciously introduce differences in the data we collect or our interpretations of that data and what conclusions we come to about the data we've collected. In research, bias is any deviation from the actual measurement when compared to what is recorded and reported on. So what is selection bias? Selection bias is an error of validity in which the study recruits participants in a manner in which the results of the study are more likely to differ from those in the population at large. In other words, we've skewed the sample, so if we were to replicate the study in the general population, we'd expect to find a different result. Selection bias can take many forms, such as incidence prevalence bias, loss to follow-up bias, non-response bias, volunteer bias, or confounding by indication bias. Selection bias doesn't just impact how researchers recruit participants in studies either. Sometimes it's the participant. Take, for instance, the case of volunteer bias, where the profile of participants who volunteer for a study is different to those who don't. On the other hand, confounding by indication occurs when clinicians allocate patients to the active arm of a study and they're more likely to have worsened conditions, a factor which hasn't been controlled for in the study. So what are the consequences of unchecked or unaccounted for selection bias? Why does it matter if selection bias is at play? Well, in studies, we need to be sure that, for example, the intervention we're testing has the same outcome amongst our intervention group as we would expect to find amongst the population who are eligible for the study. Remember, one of the hallmarks of assessing the validity of studies is how well we would be able to replicate the results of the study. If your sample is not a good representation of the population you're studying at large, the results are less valid and therefore less trustworthy than they could be. So how do we account for and control selection bias? Well, there are several methods researchers can use. Randomized selection is one important tool, as is blinding selectors, and using careful recruitment strategies. Designing the study and the recruitment to the study ensures we account for and control bias as much as possible, leading to a more accurate and trustworthy result. Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed my presentation.